So let's start. Yeah, everyone feeling good?
Woo! Yeah, I feel good.
So, as you guys know, I don't really know how to start the podcast yet, but something like, welcome to Late to the Movies, a podcast where my friends and I get to fill in our movie blind spots. Every week, we'll pick a movie that either I or a guest hasn't seen before, but really should have by now. This week, we're talking about Dead Poets Society, a 1989 picture by Peter Weir, starring Robin Williams and a super young Ethan Hawke. And Robert Sean Lawrence, I believe, is...
Leonard.
Fuck.
Yep. Wilson.
Robert Sean Leonard, yeah, Wilson from House. And Josh Charles is a baby is also in it. With me today, the person who had not seen it before, once again, is Robbie.
Haha, I don't watch movies.
Again, both you and Corey, a big boon to the podcast. Noah has seen the movie before and said it was one of his favorites, right?
I did, and I had to rewatch it because I forgot a lot of it, except some of the major, important scenes.
That's interesting. So I actually feel the same way. We'll get into it more in a little bit, but I had forgotten more about this movie than I realized I had when I went to rewatch it over the last few days.
I think almost everyone did, because I've talked to a couple of people this movie, and I mentioned the ending, and they were like, "Oh yeah, I forgot about that." Well, it's a pretty big part of the movie. It's like the turn. I mean, if you don't remember that, I don't really know what you remember about the movie.
Yeah, that's fair.
On desk part.
Exactly.
That's, I think, and we'll get to all this, but yeah, the stuff that gets parodied in it is really just in the last 3 minutes of the movie, and it's 2 hours and 8 minutes long. So
yeah.
There's a lot of other stuff too that I was surprised at how much I liked, but we'll get into that in a little bit. First off, we always start with just random talk about nonsense. So what have you guys been watching movie or TV wise, or none of the above?
I saw Blade Runner recently.
Oh, nice. Had you seen it before?
Not the original cut, no.
Okay.
No.
Interesting.
I watched the one that was on Netflix.
What'd you think of it?
I thought it was really good. Yeah, overall it was good.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, it was good.
Been watching Brooklyn Nine-Nine for my third time because I love it.
There you go. Comfort food's important too.
Yep.
I've been watching very long video game reviews, of which I will also talk about in the Blade Runner episode,
Nice.
but not for this one. Robbie, you haven't seen this movie before, so do you want to give us a brief plot overview?
Sure. All right. We got a bunch of stuffy old dudes that want to run a school like boring people. And I don't know. First question is always, do these people have fun? Do they enjoy what they're doing? Because they exist, and I would really love to talk to them as a person. Anyways, they're running a school. It's terrible. Kids are all miserable. They're just, basically memorizing a bunch of bullshit. Robin Williams comes in and he's like, "Hey, you guys should be people and have feelings." And they're like, "What?" And then he has them read poetry, and they're a bunch of horny teenagers. So now they're extra horny, and they gotta go find women. So they do. There's a whole subplot there. Turns out the real moral of the story is if you're real shitty, your kid kills himself, because then that happens. And they kick Mr. Keaton out of the school. All the kids realize how much they love him, and the old bastards win. Because that's how that goes.
We're not going to describe it in any kind of great detail because the movie doesn't show it in any kind of great detail. But yeah, important to note up top, content warning for suicide. But I think that's a pretty succinct explanation of the plot.
Yeah.
It seems like fun isn't allowed. I don't know if they're having fun. If it's just, this is what they do. This is how men behave and are expected to be, important men in the autumn of 1959 when the movie takes place.
Oh, I was going to ask that.
Same.
Okay, I was wondering, I knew it was old, but it was right 89. So I'm but they wouldn't have had much of this tech we have now anyway. But yeah.
You could have given me a 20-year span, anywhere between 50 and 70. I would have been yeah, probably. I don't know.
Especially with boarding school where oh, well, maybe they did have cool shit, but not at boarding school. You get a fucking room with some tests. But I haven't asked, can I just swear? I swear a lot. Is that a problem?
Yeah, everybody does. It's cool.
All right.
Okay.
Oh, good.
Kids, close your ears.
Mm-hmm. So this movie ostensibly starring Robin Williams. He's the name above the title on the poster. But it's really more about this group of kids who are inspired by Mr. Keating, Robin Williams' teachings. They see that he used to belong to a club called the Dead Poets Society, which was an unsanctioned kind of reading workshop for poetry where Robin Williams and a few friends would head out to the old quote-unquote Indian cave and read poems to each other, sometimes of their own verse, which isn't how people talk.
Just imagine a world where the rebellious kids sneak off and read Thoreau. It's like, oh man, those are some badasses over there.
And almost get expelled because of it.
It's like, wow, we cannot tell the administration this. I'd laugh at them, and then the administration finds out and they're like, holy shit.
Yeah.
I like sorry to bring
go
this summary up. I was just thinking of like how prude they are and stuff. And one of the scenes where they're like all just hanging out and they built like a radio or something. And one of the headmaster comes and he's like, "That's not a radio, is it?" And they like hide it under the desk, like, "Oh no, gee, no, sir.
No, I wasn't engineering complex machinery in my dorm room."
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, they're not allowed to listen to music, apparently.
It's like extra bad Footloose.
Yeah, it's extra bad Footloose. That's in a lot of ways, really.
Dancing bad, not far enough. Poetry, unless it's about math, is horrible.
They love math though.
Yes. So that's I don't know how granularly we need to break down like every lesson, but that's essentially the brunt of it. It's this group of boys who reform the Dead Poet Society, and it's about them going through what seems to be maybe 3 or 4 months of this school year. And a lot of stuff happens. It's a coming of age story, and Robin Williams, like I said, is the name above the title, but it's really about these kids. And the kids, as we mentioned at the top, one is Ethan Hawke playing Todd. There's Sean Leonard. Yeah, he was playing Neil. And the most preppy sounding name for the guy who's had the most preppy looking career, Josh Charles, plays Knox Overstreet. I don't know if you guys are too familiar with him, but he always plays like a super preppy guy.
Knox is the character with the girl, right? The love interest?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I might be thinking of the wrong one. I don't actually know any of their names. I just wait for context clues.
Oh, fair
and then
enough.
I chime in.
God, so bad.
Yeah, Josh Charles is the main character in The Good Wife. He's in over 100 episodes of that. Wow. It's on Sports Night, which is a proto Aaron Sorkin thing before West Wing. I think it's the Aaron Sorkin show before West Wing. And as I was watching this movie, I was thinking how much Aaron Sorkin must enjoy this, because he stole the ending for Trial of the Chicago 7 and then also writes a lot of his stuff like this. Yeah, pretty early on in one of the classes, Robin Williams says, "Gather ye rosebuds while you may," which is a line Aaron Sorkin's used at least 3 or 4 times in his different shows.
Interesting.
So definitely a big influence on him and a lot of other things. I don't know if you guys know that much about Peter Weir, but he's the director of this movie. And he's got like a really interesting career. He comes out of Australia in the 70s, makes a couple really interesting movies. One is The Cars That Ate Paris.
What?
Yep. No further context needed, right?
I was going to say, is it about exactly what I think it's about?
Kind of. So he's from Australia, and there's a town called Paris in Australia. And basically, it's a horror comedy where the townspeople are tricking people driving through the town into car crashes, kind of. I haven't seen it, but that's just my understanding.
I was thinking like Transformers meets.
Yeah. And then after that is his big early career hit. This not even a hit, just this big kind of seminal movie called Picnic at Hanging Rock. Have you guys ever heard of this?
Mm-mm.
So it's sort of the movie that's associated with a movement called Australian New Wave. Not to get, we don't have to get too in the weeds because it's just so pretentious too. But basically, Picnic at Hanging Rock is this awesome movie that's really, he filmed it to look sort of like an impressionist painting. And it is about a group of girls at a boarding school. And then stuff goes pretty badly.
Huh.
It's kind of, it sort of has a lot in common with modern elevated horror movies, except there's not really any horror in it. It's like a horror movie without horror, kind of.
Like all the tension. And
Yeah, you can describe it as like a mystery, but the short log line, and this isn't a spoiler because this is the premise of the movie. It's not like a late part of the movie. They're at this boarding school, and these girls go on a picnic, and they go off with a couple teachers, and some of them just don't come back, and they never find them.
Creepy.
And the movie's about people trying to find them and dealing with the grief and the shame and all that fun stuff.
Huh.
So that movie comes out and is awesome, but that's in 1975. He breaks through in America about 10 years later with a couple of Harrison Ford movies, Witness and Mosquito Coast. And then 1989's Dead Poet Society. 98's The Truman Show. And 2003's Master and Commander, which is an awesome movie.
I would never have suspected.
And then that's in 2003, and he's made one movie since then. He basically retired. So, weird dude with an interesting career, has made a lot of different kinds of movies. At least at some point, I feel like Truman Show would be a fun one to do too. So
that was a good
we'll
movie.
get back to Weir eventually.
I think I know someone that hasn't seen that.
Is it you?
It's me. It is me.
You really didn't? Well, I mean, in your defense, that's what, 98? We were, what, 7? So, you know,
Have you seen Master and Commander?
Oh.
You would dig it, I think.
Yeah.
It's great. There's
Russell Crowe.
The problem with it is it came out right in the Pirates of the Caribbean era, and I was like, I'm not watching another stupid fucking pirate movie.
But it's not, though.
It's better than that.
I'm sure it is. It's
so
just, I mean,
good.
2003, that's like right in the pirate era, and I was like, no.
It might be my favorite Russell Crowe movie over Gladiator. But
Wow. Strong.
yeah,
It
Paul
is a very
Bettany's in
good
it.
movie.
It's really good.
It's surprisingly good.
I have seen Gladiator, so.
There you go. The one thing that I do want to kind of track, Peter Weir from Australia, there's a lot of droning in the soundtrack. He didn't do the music, but I definitely picked up on, I don't know what it is, but this sort of stereotypical, I don't know if it's didgeridoos or whatever. Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of that
That's a
happening.
really good impression of one.
Yeah, there's
I do it.
a lot of that happening, especially when it sort of gets weird, whether it's when the kids are running through the forest or when Neil gets back from the play and is thinking about killing himself. It's that weird music happening. Yeah. So there's that happening. And then
Playing that didgeridoo.
so I couldn't connect this mentally. And then Robin Williams plays bagpipes.
Yes.
And there's one just absolutely amazing shot that is just there so Peter Weir can be like, oh, I'm really good at making movies, where it's just a transition shot where it's morning and there's this golden light coming down and it's Robin Williams playing bagpipes on the dock of the lake. And it's just him silhouetted by this sort of like golden pink light. And you're like, well, that didn't need to be in here. So
I missed it.
I know what scene you're talking about, and I didn't realize
it's
it
just
was
a
on.
transition. It's not even anything. It might not even be, but I think he's the one with the bagpipes.
I hope he is.
Just because bagpipes are weird and he's weird, I guess. In other hands, this movie would have a lot less beauty, maybe, or definitely a lot less weirdness too. So I just wanted to point that out as a sort of way to kick off a discussion about the movie itself and how surprising it was to me and how much I enjoyed it for the craft of how it was made. But anyway, if there's anything you guys want to talk about, I've been monologuing for a while and I'm tired.
Okay. I bringing up that particular scene, I really enjoyed a lot of the scenery that they had in the movie. Maybe it's just because like I'm from New England, so I have special.
That's fair.
I don't even know if it was filmed in like New England, but that's the kind of vibes I get.
I think it's supposed to be in Vermont, but they filmed in Delaware.
Oh, okay.
But whatever, it looks like New England.
Yeah, it had all those kind of vibes.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed just like some of the scenes like where they're playing soccer with the classical music in the background, and I don't know, just some of those shots. The one where I think it was Knox was riding his bicycle down a hill, and there was like a bunch of geese. There's like a lot of like little stuff
good.
like that thrown in there that I feel like you were saying with that scene with the bagpipes didn't need to be in there, but just added to like the beauty of the film.
It gets pretty good reviews when it comes out. It wins the Academy Award for screenplay, but it is much more beloved overseas.
Really?
Yeah, it wins the equivalent of best movie for the top prize in Britain, Italy, and in France. For foreign film, some of it, but still. I can kind of see why, because it has everything Europeans love, right? There's like young men coming of age at a boarding school, riding bikes through the countryside. There's a decent amount of homoeroticism. Like, it's everything Europeans really love. So, I can see why Americans were kind of not as... When I say Americans, they're notable critics at the time. You'd probably say Roger Ebert and Siskel, Pauline Kael, Leonard Maltin, all these sort of like luminaries of American film criticism all thought it was at best fine. And at worst, both Siskel and Ebert thought it was the worst movie nominated for Oscars that year.
Oh, wow.
And it's just sort of this kind of like suspension of disbelief that feels like when you watch European movies, they don't take themselves quite as seriously sometimes. I think especially French movies. If you think of like their version of Blade Runner as Fifth Element, and that's just so silly and nonsense.
Also haven't seen Fifth Element.
We'll get there. We'll get there. But that's a Luc Besson film, even though it's, an American production or whatever.
Oh, I didn't know it was like a French.
Yeah, it has such a French sensibility. And again, there's guys dressed as women and just a lot of singing. But,
The Europeans just appreciated that.
I feel like I'm rambling a lot tonight, but it's okay.
It's good content.
I don't know about that. Point being, there is a sort of quality of this movie that I feel like a lot of the most prestigious, if you want to say that, American critics couldn't get over themselves enough to let themselves enjoy it for what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And that didn't seem to be as big a problem for the Europeans. And I might cut out everything I said in between those two.
Just leave it in.
Anyway, what did you guys think about the movie?
I had a couple thoughts. I was wondering if the Dead Poets was a real actual group, because I started reading off like David Thoreau and like a couple other people. So I'm wondering if there was some kind of like, I think they did a movie, The Skulls or something like that, about a Harvard secret society that actually did exist.
What, Yale is Skull and Bones?
Skull, yeah. But I was just wondering if that's a thing. I didn't have a chance to look that up yet.
I think those kinds of like secret societies exist at prep schools where they're, don't have as much else to do, I guess. But yeah, I don't know if it is or not. I don't think so, but I could be wrong. I don't know. The school itself is fictional, but obviously there's plenty of schools like it. It's not that far outside of a realistic depiction of how those boarding prep schools would have looked in 1959 in, rural New England. I assume that's pretty much how they looked and felt.
Mm. Oh, I liked in the beginning when he was asking, Charlie, tell me why they swoon. I thought that was just like a hilarious little bit in there. Like, tell me why. It's like, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows why women swoon.
I know, he was so curious.
Yeah. I really love the way it depicts these guys. It feels pretty much like what teenage boys are like.
Absolutely.
And it helps that they're actually teenage boys. I think all of them are actually teenage. They're not, 24 playing 18.
That does help.
I think they're all around 18 or 19 in this movie. So, it super helps. And I don't know, they're really good. I feel like all the dudes are really good.
Yeah, I would agree.
You can tell they're just having a good time with it.
Yeah.
Go ahead when he grabs his poetry and they're like running around and like all of a sudden somebody's got a flute and it's like, what the hell is going on in here?
Yeah, there's just so much like pent up energy, and that starts as a fight and then turns into just this sort of outburst of ecstatic, I don't know,
just expression,
excuses for them to like touch each other a bunch, maybe. Who knows? We'll get into that, I'm sure, later too.
I just saw a meme that was like, men invented arm wrestling so they could hold hands and look each other in the eye.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. We're doing Good Will Hunting soon. That is what he won an Academy Award for. He got nominated for this role, but I feel like this sort of capitalizes on what makes him such an endearing performer almost more. I just feel like it's such a good use of him and capitalizes on him without having him stand out from the story it's telling, which I feel like is like almost a magic trick.
Yeah. I think you put it really well, because he is in this movie what I imagine him to just be as like a normal person. Like if he were an English teacher, I feel like that's what he would be like the part where he's he's doing like lines of Shakespeare, but he's doing it in like John Wayne and like all these different accents. I'm like, oh, that's just Robin Williams.
I'm sad I didn't write it down, but there was one part where one of the people said something and his like immediate knee jerk was just like, well, that's blah, 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 blah. What are you? And it was just like such a classic, like Robin Williams. And it was like, that was, I don't know. I just loved it. It was very much what we were talking about though, where it was just like, I don't even think it was scripted. I think the kid just said something and Robin ran with it. I wish I wrote it down, but
I know what you mean, but I can't think of the specific part either. But there is a lot of times like that where even when he does kind of dip into the kind of manic energy, it still works in the scene, which is, I don't know, it feels like it almost shouldn't, but it just works for me. It doesn't for a lot of people, apparently.
oh, is that what the critics are getting at? Is they don't like that blend of like...
Kind of. They think it's too much of his on-stage persona, but I probably disagree.
Yeah.
We'll get to the criticism parts at the end, but for now, I don't know. This might be my favorite use of Robin Williams in a dramatic role.
Yeah,
So good.
I would agree with that.
It sets up this kind of malaise at the beginning that's then cut with the Robin Williams stuff. And that first class has a lot of the iconic parts of it. But another thing that I appreciated how Weir did it, and again, I can see why if you took any of these moments out of context and just looked at them without watching it in the context of the movie, it probably comes across as really corny or maybe a little cloying or dishonest or whatever. But in the movie, I feel like it works really well. And the sequence where he has them look at the pictures of like the 1901 football team or whatever and is like whispering Carpe Diem into the boys' ears. Again, if you just took that out of context, you're like, oh, this is like a comedic scene. But it's not played that way in the movie. It's actually really affecting.
Yes.
And it's the slow pans over the black and white faces and the portraits on the wall and him whispering and the music kind of all drops out and stuff. And you're like, oh, this is actually pretty affecting.
Yeah, and I mean, Robin Williams is the type of person where, like we were saying, if he was a teacher, he absolutely would do something like that. And he would be able to do it with that, like, I mean, your natural reaction as like a kid or a viewer would be to like nobody's saying carpe diem, but he just, it works for him. I don't know why, but he's got his good. And
you get why it just casts a spell on these kids, because it sets up every other class is strictly boring lecturing, and that's it. They sit there and listen to do lecture.
I like how they had the cuts of them going to the different classes, and then the cut of his class, just to show like the stark comparison of how different his style was from the rest of the film.
Keep going.
I was gonna say I found myself under his spell too. There's parts of the movie where I was just like listening to him, like you could see the kids' faces, and I'm sure my face looked like that at some points too when he was talking.
And then another thing that it does that's probably not subtle, but whatever, is the class. One of the classes it shows, maybe even the one right before the first Robin Williams class, is a Latin class where the professor is just saying Latin words and they're saying them back, and they're so disengaged. And then the Robin Williams class, also kind of a Latin class with Carpe Diem, but they're just so much more locked in, and you see that immediately.
Well, the Latin was especially because it wasn't even different words. It was different conjugations of the same word.
Yeah.
It was just like, oh my God. And the thing that killed me with it is they were just repeating it back and forth. There was no like, you didn't know what any of them meant. I have no idea what the purpose of that class was, other than just be boring as hell. But it's obviously
that's what
directors
they were going for. Yeah.
Pretty early on, Josh Charles's character Knox goes to a dinner at a family friend's house, and you see the sort of baseline for how all these guys are going to react to just seeing a girl.
Yes.
He completely loses his mind basically, and is ruined for the rest of the movie just by seeing a girl.
She's not a girl. She's the most beautiful girl he's ever seen.
Yeah.
Dan.
See, now you know why they can't handle shoulders.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. So that begins his whole plot line of trying to get this girl to fall for him, that is trying to shut him down a lot of times in different ways.
Persistent.
There's a minor sexual harassment B plot. It's okay.
A little bit.
So one of the things I remembered about this movie was that, and that one of the kids dies. And that was like my going into it was that. And that part in my mind was a lot worse than it was in the movie. Still not cool. Not saying it's cool. Not great. Even in 1959, the people knew it was like pretty fucked up.
Yeah.
So that can tell you. But that and that one of the kids dies, and I couldn't remember specifically how. I thought it was a car crash for something. For some reason, I'm realizing after watching it, it's just because he's in a car right before, and everyone's sad when he gets in a car.
Oh, gotcha. Yep.
Anyway, that's later on, but it sets up that, and then he goes back to the boarding school and is like really talking up this interaction that lasted no more than 7 seconds with a girl who was just like, "Oh, who are you? Okay, I'll get the parents." And that again, just ringing true to how boys are, right?
Mm-hmm.
That he's back in, like, they're all getting ready for bed or whatever, and he's like, "You guys aren't gonna believe it. I met the most beautiful girl. I can tell she's into me."
Well, then he calls her and she's like, I was hoping you called. You want to go to a party? It's like, that was their entire conversation. She didn't even want to know why he called. She's just like, I'm glad you called. Let's go to a party.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Well, that's how he takes it, but it's really just like, there is a big party, and
Oh, that's true. That's true.
do you want to also attend? And then they're like, the other friends are there, and they're like, she's not saying that she wants to go with you to the party. He's like, "Oh yeah, no, I got that."
It's fine. I'm just going to like follow her around weirdly anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Read poetry to her in her public school.
That was a fun distinction too, to see like immediately they just had like a fish out of water thing with him where he was like supposed to be the nerdy kid there, which I thought was funny because he was like drinking a beer like it wasn't a problem, which really wouldn't have been in 69 because they were like 59, like a year away from the drinking age. It's like, oh, whiskey. I don't drink whiskey. It's like, oh yeah, he's a nerd because he doesn't drink whiskey.
Yeah.
No, but no, it was funny though because they were just like a lot more rambunctious, and you could tell like that's probably why these other girls in the cave were so like, oh, you read poetry, because these other guys are like all stereotypical football player, jock type.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's at the party, and the guys make him drink whiskey because they think he's the kid brother of someone else, and he's like, "No, I'm good. I'm just gonna head out." And they're like, "No, stay here." And then they like make him drink and stuff, and it feels a lot like a similar scene in Superbad, where Michael Cera stumbles into a room, and they think he's someone's brother.
Oh yeah.
In Superbad, they make him sing. They don't make Josh Charles sing in this one, but
Yes, that's
another high school coming of age guys who don't know how to interact with women movie.
Yep.
nice.
It's a shout out to Dead Poet Society.
Probably.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah.
So we should talk about, they start doing these meetings again in the, again, quote unquote, Indian cave in the woods. Their first walk there is another one of these sequences that is filmed like a horror movie where they're kind of slow motion running through this misty, dark woods, and they all have their hoods on. And you're like, I don't know why they did this, but I like it. It looks cool. It's like visually, I'm into it. I'm not questioning it. And then the meeting starts, and I don't know. You guys have any thoughts about their meetings?
I like their meetings. I liked how each one was like a little bit different, and they were bringing like different energies and
Yeah,
different vibes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I thought they did a good job with that. I thought it was. I lost my train of thought.
That's okay.
I
Choo
really
choo.
like the Thoreau quote they use. I think that's one of my favorite quotes by him. Even
Sucking the marrow out of life.
yeah, well, just the live deliberately part. I like the I wish to live deliberately. I say that to myself a lot if I'm trying to like make a decision. It's like, what would I deliberately do? Let's not do things stupidly.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just kind of willy nilly. But I do also know that Thoreau was a fraud living in his mom's cabin while he was writing that kind of stuff. So
Oh, really?
It was
great
his
song.
mom's cabin.
So he went off into the woods, but the woods was like walking distance from home. So his mom would like drop him off like lunches and stuff like that. Like it's like, I wish to live deliberately, but mom, I'm gonna need that meatloaf at 5.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, being just a cool thinker doesn't always pay the bills.
that's
Yeah,
true.
that's true.
That is true. Ask Diogenes.
I was gonna say something about the big scene, but I don't know if we want to get there.
Let's never talk about that
Okay.
scene.
Perfect. I will say when I don't know his name, but I called him Red when he
Go ahead.
when the guy's dad showed up. I was like, oh, he's gonna put up his foot up so many asses, and it turned
Yeah.
out he did put his foot up so
Yeah,
many
he did.
asses.
That actor is Kurtwood Smith, and
I was gonna make a comment about that, about watching him on that '70s show, and then seeing that basically that character, but not portrayed in like a comedic light.
It's the same character. It's just
Yeah.
like there's not a laugh
That was-
track behind
yeah.
it.
yeah,
That was the weirdest part about it.
I think a 70s show is 8 years after this. I think it starts like 96, 97, something like that.
Yep. Yeah.
So maybe more. Yeah, so like 8-ish years after this. He looks the same.
Yeah, like literally.
A lot of the same energy. I guess that's just what he does as an actor. Hey, if it works.
Yeah.
Right around this point in the movie, you also get the introduction of the idea of desk standing, where Robin Williams has everyone stand up on desk, like in turn, just to be like, the stuff looks different. That's pretty much.
It's like the most fun they had in a week.
Yeah, they got to stand on a desk a little bit. That was cool.
I remember one of my teachers did that as like an exercise. And I had seen the movie like around that time. I was like, I know where you got that from.
I think a lot of teachers wanted to be this kind of
If I was a teacher,
person.
I would want to be Mr. Keating.
You want to have that effect on people.
Yeah.
Knowing what I know about teaching today, even the first time he came into the classroom and everyone was quiet, I was like, it's not like that though. It's a lot harder to get their attention, I think, today for most of my friends who teach.
As we found out, those kids were under threat of corporal punishment, so that does make for a quieter class.
The paddle.
That's true. Around here-ish is when Charlie publishes an article under the name Dead Poets Society, or I guess under the byline of the Dead Poets Society in the school paper about how women should be allowed into the school.
We're so horny.
Yeah, pretty much. He has a good bit at a school assembly about a phone call from God.
That was a good bit.
Good bit. Prop comedy in the 50s is way ahead of his time.
He wired a telephone into that
'cause
auditorium
it
for that
rang.
bit.
Yeah.
That's commitment.
And he had to have someone call it.
Yeah, no.
Carrot
that's,
Top could never.
It's a lot of planning.
So that happens, and that's when the corporal punishment is introduced, as the old guy really paddles him quite a bit.
Which goes back to my first note, which I wrote, bunch of diddlers for sure.
Yeah, paddle can't be the number one.
He had a look in
anyway.
his eye.
And then he's like, and count it. And it's like, oh, this is weird.
this is weird.
I think that's where they get their enjoyment from.
Yeah, probably.
Oh, no.
Probably. Before he publishes that article, or right around then, is when he tells the guys to call him Nawanda.
Oh, yep.
Nawanda forever.
Yeah, exactly. But it's pretty weird. It's kind of dumb, right?
I for the life of me, like, I had no idea why he wanted to be called Nawanda, but I also know there's like at least 6 liberal arts majors I met in college that would have done that same exact thing.
Yeah. In his defense, it is kind of a cool line when he's limping back to his room, and they ask him, "Oh, Charlie, did you tell them who else is in Dead Poets Society?" And he goes, "Name's Nawanda."
Yep. You just knew.
Yep.
And also setting up how cool it is to not tell on your friends for later in the movie.
Cameron.
We should mention a little before that happens, but who cares? If you're listening to this, you're probably not watching along. You're not going to know the exact order. The scene where Todd, Ethan Hawke's character, who we've barely mentioned, but we'll get to him, hopefully at some point. I don't know. We're pretty far in already.
Well,
Who cares?
he was quiet.
It was like, one of the main characters. We'll talk about him eventually, hopefully. He has to recite a poem in front of class, and he's terrified to speak in front of class. He doesn't even talk at the Dead Poets Society meetings. Well, he doesn't read, he talks. In front of class, though, he says he didn't do a poem, obviously in a pretty unsuccessful effort to get out of reading it. So Robin Williams has him stand up and sort of just compose a poem on the spot in front of class. This sequence is awesome. It's, again, another one that is filmed. Essentially, it's just people talking, but the camera is like spinning around them as they're spinning in the opposite direction. And it makes it just electric in a pretty interesting way. And that's a really cool scene that is not one of the parodied scenes in the movie, but is just as sort of electric as those, I feel like.
That was one of the scenes that I had remembered as well. The few scenes that I had remembered was that one.
It's good stuff.
Yeah.
He talks about a blanket that as much as you stretch, it won't ever cover your feet or something to that effect. And everyone's like, good poem.
Yeah. He got the slow clap.
He got the slow clap. Robin Williams grabs him by the face and tells him to remember this. So you know it's important. And so we should talk about Neil now. And basically, after the first hour of the movie, there's not a ton of Robin Williams left. And we switch to a lot of Neil stuff. And Knox goes to a party. Some of them almost get expelled, but it's mostly about Neil getting into this play. And ultimately, that's what leads him to killing himself. There's some stuff in between.
Yeah, so his dad's very anti-arts or anything besides academics.
Mm-hmm.
Finally gets auditions for this play, gets the lead role, and then what happens? He ends up telling his dad, or his dad finds out?
His dad gets told by like one of his friends that he's in the
right.
play with like their daughter or their niece.
Yeah. So his dad shows up, tells him he has to quit. He tearfully goes to Keating's office, and Keating tells him, well, if this was what you're passionate about and what you want to do, and you feel like your whole life's planned for you, and you don't want it to just go without you having a say in it, you need to tell your dad that. So he does, and at first his dad lets him stay with the play because he says he's in Chicago anyway, but it turns out he leaves Chicago to come to this play, apparently.
I don't think he told his dad.
I also don't think he told
You
his
don't
dad.
think so?
No, I think he made that whole thing up. And I think his dad was supposed to be in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
So he told Mr. Keating, oh, I told him it's fine. He's going to be in Chicago.
I think you're probably right.
And that's he goes back and he's like, he really should be in Chicago. And he says it like 3 times. So it's more of like a nervous, like.
I think so.
And then when his dad shows up, he's like, I can't believe you did this anyway. So
Yep. So he plays Puck in Midsummer's Night's Dream, and is, has a really good time doing it.
Kills it.
He pretty much kills it.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, in the context of the story, based on the reactions of everyone else, they all are like, "You did such a great job." But his father tells him, "Get in the car. We're going home." And they get home. His mother's there. Doesn't really stick up for him or anything. And they have a yelling fight. His father tells him he's pulling him out of Welton, which is the name of the boarding school we haven't mentioned yet, and putting him in military academy, and you're going to be a doctor.
The thing with the mom, though, and I don't know if it was the director's intention, but there's a whole nother movie behind that whole scene. Because, like, even before he got there, she's sitting there, she's smoking a cigarette. There's, like, a gloom. Like, you can tell, like, she's probably checked out for, like, 15 years at this point. Mm-hmm. And, like, even when she's going back upstairs to bed, she's, like, behind him. She knows what he's going through because he's beaten her down the same exact way.
Yeah.
And like, what do you say? And then even right before she goes to bed, she lets out that like little like, and he's like, I know it's going to be okay. He's a good kid. And like, that's not what she's crying about, you arrogant asshole. Like,
yeah, she's upset that you're squashing all this boy's hopes and passions and dreams. And and it just seems like really shitty and unfair because, as he says, he has straight A's and he's doing really well in school.
Yeah, it's just a power trip. I mean,
pretty much, yeah. And that's what everyone, that's what we said before. I don't even know why these old stuffy men like doing this. It's all, they have their little corner of the world that they have power over, and they enjoy that.
That's what they want. And there was even one point they just come out and say it. We just prep them for college and the rest will sort itself out. Like, that's like their direct quote. And it's like, that's such a horrible, and like, look at our generation now. They still kept doing that. That was the attitude in the 60s and it went right up through till now. The kids are like, we did college. What are we supposed to do now?
But yeah, it's at this point, Neil, seeing no way out, kills himself with a gun. That sequence, again, another droning sounds and filmed essentially very eerily. Some incredible shots in that, but it's not, fun to revisit. Probably won't for a while.
My thing with that too is like, you could tell where it was going, right? You had the sound and you knew what was happening, but the way he did it, even after like the father woke up and heard the noise, I don't know, like this was my first time seeing him, so I wanted to feel like he wasn't dead, like that there was a misfire. There's another way for this story to resolve itself. Like, you know what they did a very good job of, like, even though you knew clearly what was going to happen and that it did happen, that I just still didn't even accept it until the parents finally did. I don't know. It was. Yeah.
Yeah. It was almost like too serious for the movie.
Oh, I could see that. Yeah.
Yeah. But that scene where, like, that scene post him doing it, and then the dad walking downstairs, him walking into the room. You could see the whole like train of thought. He smells the gunpowder, and then he's like, you could see him connect the dots, and then when he finds him, that was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
That was brutal.
Yeah, it is brutal. And the following scene where the other dead poets go to tell Todd, it seems everyone else already knows, and they're all crying and they tell him. And then the sequence where they're out in the snow and he's like throwing up and running and falling down and stuff.
Mm.
Yeah, affecting shit.
Yeah.
I think you see at this point, Robin Williams, who's been absent for a little bit in the movie, he goes into Neil's desk and he finds his copy of the, 500 years of poetry or literature or something like that, right?
5 centuries of verse or something.
Yeah, it's like 5 centuries of verse, and he sees his own inscription in the front, and then he just breaks down, and that's
Oh, I was crying. I was crying.
that stuff is crazy. And then pretty much we go right to the end. Cameron rats out all the other dead poets.
Yep.
Todd goes into the main guy's office and sees that everyone else has already signed this paper that says that this is all Keating's fault. In a way that like doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't.
But they need a scapegoat. And even though the Dead Poet Society was dudes hanging out and reading poetry, they'll gonna blame these kids for it if they don't blame Keating. So seeing that everyone else has already signed it, he signs it too. Keating is removed from the school, but comes to collect his personals. And that's where the sequence happens where he's leaving the classroom and Todd, finally finding his voice, stands up to the main administrator who has come to cover the class for the rest of the semester and says, they made us sign it. We didn't want to. And then after briefly being rebuked and sitting back down, he stands on his desk and says, "Oh, Captain, my captain." The rest of the dead poets and some other people follow suit, not Cameron. And Keating says, "Thank you, boys. Thank you." And that's the end of the movie. Bagpipes start blaring over the end credits.
So yeah, it was just it was interesting when they were going through the like blaming Keating and stuff like that, and they gave the reason. And the reason they gave for him killing himself was Keating filling his mind with a bunch of nonsense. And it clicked for me. I don't know if like I've heard that expression before in like other movies and other like it's something people used to say all the time, like, oh, that person filled their head with nonsense and they ran off, or filled their head with nonsense and they killed themselves. And it's has nonsense just always been telling people to follow their dreams and believe in themselves? Because
I don't know.
Well, in 50s America.
Yeah.
you know what I mean? But like, yeah, like that's the expression that I've heard 1,000 times, and I've never given it thought of. Like when somebody says, "Oh, they were told a bunch of nonsense," I never stop and go, "Well, what was the nonsense?" And I think it's an important thing to recognize in the movie is he gave a very good message, and at the end it was called nonsense, and nobody really stopped and said like, well, what does that even mean? And yeah. I haven't in real life either, and it's just it's something that I'm going to think about if I hear something similar in the future. Is like, well, explain what you mean by nonsense. Like, what did they actually say?
And I guess the message at the end, ending on that scene, is that not necessarily that this guy lost his job and his friend died just so he would be not afraid to speak in class, but Todd and Meeks and Pitts and the other guys, they're all going to be free thinkers, sure, but they're going to be better rounded people. They're just going to, live for, I almost said, something that would have sounded like a line from Rent, but basically they're going to carpe that diem.
Yeah, well, and I mean, at the end,
slide right into that diem.
There was when he was packing his stuff, there was the other teacher that had the kids outside that waved to him. So, maybe he made an impact on some of the teachers too. They don't kind of show a lot of that.
Yeah, there's that guy that there's like 3 times that they talk or whatever, but you can tell he's like...
They're friendly.
Yeah, he's sort of this guy who's kind of on the stuffy side of things, but he sees Keating's point.
Yeah.
And he appreciates that he's like a warm dude trying to do something.
He was the Latin guy too, so he was still teaching him Latin, but he was making him walk outside with it. So it was like,
guy.
Yep. Exactly.
Something.
Yeah.
So there's one big thing I do want to talk about with this movie that was sort of, I think the last time I saw this movie, I was probably in high school. And in the years since, a lot of it gets sanded down to standing on desks, to Carpe Diem, to Robin Williams doing Shakespeare as John Wayne and Josh Charles sexually assaulting someone kind of at a party in a basement.
Oh, yeah.
And you miss all the other stuff, the connective tissue. I forgot Ethan Hawke was in this movie. And one thing that was kind of stood out to me this time, and then I went online and I saw if this was kind of a common reading, and it is, do you guys think Neil's gay?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The client, the
okay.
roommate.
Neil, the main guy who dies.
Oh, interesting.
That's a good question.
I thought his roommate definitely was.
Well, that's also part of the reading.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So
I don't.
part of it is a lot drawn from the part of the play. And in the 80s, they're still sort of suffering, creatives in Hollywood, under the Hays Code. And you can't necessarily directly say a character is gay or whatever. You know, it's still kind of this prudish thing, even though it's in the 80s. And then certainly a character who's in the 1959 wouldn't be able to admit that or whatever. So there's a lot drawn from the choice to have it be Midsummer's Night's Dream, the choice to have him be playing Puck, and to have him play that instead of just like, if it's just a movie about a kid in a play, he's Hamlet, right? He just does something normal. The fact that when they're back at their house and they're yelling at each other, the dad and Neil and the mom, and Neil says, I have to tell you how I feel, and the parents kind of freak out. It's because they know he's gay and they can't admit that.
Yeah.
That's part of the reading.
A lot of that would make sense.
I could see that. I think what I would guess, or like as you say that, is if he is gay, I don't think he knows yet either.
No, I don't think so either.
Like, I think he just wouldn't have had a chance to explore that. But I think that's a good ambiguity there of like,
that's also part of what how the people who read it this way is that he doesn't know that.
he would have if he got to explore that acting career, but
yeah, he and Todd, Ethan Hawke's character, clearly love each other.
He throws up. Oh, that's very
and like and the rest of the friends recognize that. That's why they tell him last.
Yeah,
that's why it's so like him just in such a state of grief in the snow outside, really just, basically rending garments. I was
gonna say like that scene when they woke the friend up like really stuck with me, because we had a friend commit suicide and my girlfriend came over and woke me up like that exactly to tell me like that it happened. So I can imagine that hits a nerve. Well, just to say like, oh, that's how you would treat somebody who, I mean, I guess a little bit different, but still a similar context.
Yeah, essentially, like this is the partner of the person,
right?
Or whatever.
Yeah. Whereas mine was the partner, but yeah.
No, I got you. But yeah, so that's kind of a common reading of it. And that is what I picked up on this time. I think it makes sense. Like you said, I don't think he knows necessarily, and maybe he's not gay, maybe he's bi, whatever. But he is very specifically one of the few dudes in the movie who aren't insanely crazy about girls either.
Yeah, I don't even think he mentioned.
They don't. Yeah, it's not a part of it. It's like
it's not a part of it, really.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Considering how horny everyone else is.
Right, exactly, yeah. And he's just kind of this sort of perfect dude.
And if I remember correctly, he was the one that was most questioning about when they were bringing the girls into the cave.
Yeah. He just wanted to like stick it to the
thing,
the program.
But
everyone else was like, "Oh, girls."
Exactly. Like everyone's like girls. He's like, "Yeah, girls, but program."
Okay, we need to get the meeting going. Come on, and Todd, take the minutes. And then you look at the relationship with him and Todd, and it's really kind of a partner relationship with him pushing Todd, and they talk about the scene that ends in them chasing each other around. And it's when he's really excited about the play and Todd kind of is more the realistic anchor and saying like, I mean, how are you even going to do this? Your dad's going to bring you out of school. Like you can't. And he's just like, just let me dream for like a second. Why don't you ever like do anything? And then Todd's like, you don't understand. I'm not like you. I can't just like be cool and talk in front of people and stuff. Can you just like leave me alone? I'm fine on my own. And Neil says, no. He goes,
Yeah,
what
literally
do you
says
mean,
no.
Nope, not gonna do that.
No. What do you mean no? And he's like, no, you're better than this. You're going to like push yourself and like do all this stuff. And that's when he steals his poetry and makes him chase him around the room. And then it just sort of is like all these guys in the room and just ecstatic energy and stuff. And yeah, I don't know. They have a really cool relationship in the movie. The part with the desk set and he has him throw it off the.
I like that scene.
I guess they have like a bridge or
Something.
high ramparts of the school.
I definitely pictured it as just like the wall, like over like, like a 20-foot wall. And I really had like a comedy like snip where like somebody's like walking by. Oh, fuck.
I think he threw like a protractor and something pointy.
It looked sealed until he threw it. And then there was just like scissors and everything. They were just going crazy.
He basically chucked scissors from like 20 feet off the ground just randomly.
Their whole bit with that thing though was pretty freaking hilarious. Like, especially it's like, oh, don't worry, I'm sure you'll get another one next year.
Yeah.
Oh my god,
all the lines.
Well, and then that was the other thing. So he's in the principal's office. One of his friends just killed himself. And his dad is like, when he's debating signing the paper, he's like, "Can you just sign it already? We've been here long enough," or something like that. And I'm just like, yeah. He couldn't even pick out a Christmas present. Now, like 5 minutes dealing with his son, who just dealt with, oh my god.
Yeah. He says like, this has gone on long enough. It's like, dude, you just got here.
What do you mean?
You haven't even. You've just been living your life.
You don't even have to parent your kid. Like, this is one day for you.
It's like, I had meetings to attend.
It seemed like all their parents were pretty terrible. At least Todd and Neil.
I mean, I'm sure a lot of people send their kids to boarding school for good reasons, but I think a good percentage just don't want to be parents.
Yeah. I think the only one they specify is really rich is Charlie / Nawanda.
Oh, yep.
Because that's when Neil says like, oh, I get where my dad's coming from. I'm not rich like Charlie. And he does have big rich kid energy.
He does. But I mean, he was pretty well off too. His dad seemed to have a chip on his shoulder, and you could just like tell from their whole like thing.
I'm
like,
sure they were all comfortable.
Fine.
Yeah, I'm sure they were all comfortable.
No, but his dad probably brushes shoulders with the dads of the other kids, and he wants his son to, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Yeah, a couple quotes about that. So there was an article on Bright Wall Dark Room from 2016 by Christopher Cantwell, who was the co-creator, and he also wrote and showrun, directed some episodes of *Halt and Catch Fire*. I don't know if you guys ever watched that. Cool show. It starts season 1 so-so, but then it becomes like one of the best shows on TV. Really good. About computers. You'd like it. But about that sequence, there isn't after he's talking about his reading of it as Neil being gay and his own reflections of when he was in high school, there was an upperclassman who was a freshman, and there was a senior who also committed suicide that was in theater and stuff. And it's unfortunately an experience a lot of people share. And then talking about in other movies, after his dad sees him at the play, there's like, oh, I get it now scene or whatever. Or with Ethan Hawke, he talks to his dad, like Todd talks to his dad, and there's like a reconciliation, like, oh, I gotta like start treating you better or whatever. But what he says, and here's why I'm glad Dead Poets Society doesn't have that scene of reconciliation between Todd and his father, even after Neil's death, because instead we get that beautiful wide shot of Todd running and falling, screaming and crying out into the endless frozen winter tundra beyond his school. And God, if that doesn't feel like growing up.
Oof.
Yeah, good stuff. So yeah, that's pretty much how I felt about that too.
Yeah.
The reason that I kind of independently from looking it up and seeing that other people felt that way, thought Neil was gay, is because otherwise it's a real escalation for him to kill himself after that, I feel like.
Yeah.
Because it's just, without that, it's him thinking pretty much where he was before, right? I don't have control over my own life. I have to do all this stuff. And that sucks. But if it's it's kind of like a pretty big escalation to get there. Not that it wouldn't, but just saying it makes a lot more sense if he's had this confrontation with his father and realized that his parents don't want to really hear how he feels about anything. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't understand how he's feeling. And they're clearly not supporting him or trying to help him. And he just doesn't see any way out of that, pretty much.
Yeah, well, he said he's like 10 more years. That's a lifetime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, yeah.
And I mean, for him, it's almost, what, you're 17, so it's pretty much like 7 years short of being as long as he's lived.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a prison sentence.
Right. Yeah. In lieu of a game, I just have some thought questions. Is Keating a good teacher?
I think so.
So some of the criticism of the movie is that he keeps saying he wants them to be free thinkers, but then he keeps telling them to do things and they do exactly what he told them to do.
Well, yes, but then when they were marching around, the other kid, he stood up against the wall and he was like, "I'm exercising my right to not do that." And he's like, "There you go. That's exactly."
Yeah.
So he probably had a whole lesson plan for like 9 more months of teaching that maybe would have gotten the rest of them there too.
That's true.
Yeah.
But
That's fair.
My answer to the question too would be like, by any like of current curriculum standards, no, he wouldn't be a good teacher. But by like, did he get people to think, and like, did he get kids interested in the subject? Absolutely. I mean, one of my notes on it was it's funny that schools play this movie all the time and like not realize, like, you still do all of this stuff.
Don't you
like,
get it?
It's not as extreme, but yeah. So no, he's a great teacher, but by standards, I can see where critics would say he wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, that he's more just not my thoughts, but that's what critics said, is that he's selling them think differently, by which I mean exactly like me.
Well, how do you tell somebody to think differently? Then like you always end up in that paradox.
Yeah, I don't know. That's what Apple did, right? Isn't that their slogan? Think different or whatever.
Oh man, they made the same phone for 15 years.
Exactly.
Kind of on that note too. I feel like not a lot of teachers teach or whatever. It's not really taught how to live.
No.
Which is like such a big part of life, but it's not really addressed in schools unless you get a particular kind of teacher or mentor or something outside of the school system.
Yeah, they teach
It's definitely the
memorization.
exception, though.
Yeah.
It's just memorization, and we need application. You need to know how to critically think. You need to be able to find information. You need to know how to apply it. That's the important parts. We have all of the information. Memorization is shit now. Nobody needs to memorize anything.
Right, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I think that's, what I take out of the movie isn't, so a lot of criticism also comes from like humanities teachers or English majors and stuff who are like, this isn't actually criticism. What he's teaching them is not what we call criticism. It's what we more call appreciation. It's fandom, right? He's saying, don't think critically about these things. Just let it wash over you and just like be happy. Again, I'm just saying that's the criticism of this, is that he's not teaching them analysis and criticism. He's teaching them poetry appreciation. And does that in some kind of sick way poison our culture because this is considered such an inspirational movie? And now anytime somebody criticizes a Marvel movie, you have a billion people saying, why can't you just let people enjoy things?
Okay, fair. Counter, and like even as they started like reading that, like, this is what makes a good poem. I wrote how to grade poetry. Dumb.
Yeah.
There's no like you can't tell me what is and what isn't a good poem. You can tell me what is and isn't popular. So like you can have all of these rules and you can say like, well, this isn't academically a great poem. Well, then you've missed the entire purpose of poetry. Do you know what? Like, you can grade things as much as you want, but that's not the point of writing poems. So what did they poison? They poisoned your academic concept of poetry you want to sell to other English majors. Sorry, that's my soapbox.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. How do you judge a poem? It wasn't that like his whole thing was that he was saying you're like, yeah, you're going to do math and you're going to live your life and whatever.
Those are important.
Yeah, those are important, but you're also a human. And part of being a human is self-expression and passion and appreciation of what that is.
We live for bad poetry. I
Yeah.
mean, that's
Hell yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just trash people living for bad poetry.
hell yeah.
For me, though, it's not so much about that. I think, like we've talked about already, it's just these different things happening in the movie just work on me. And it doesn't matter necessarily if it's an accurate depiction of how people in academia critically think about poetry, which is important. But to me, I understand why that irks them. But for me, it doesn't really affect my enjoyment of the movie. So I don't know. Maybe I'm more of an appreciation person than a criticism person.
Yeah.
I think you could argue that's what this podcast is.
Yeah.
We do a little
That's what
bit.
we're doing.
I hope so, but I get it also in both directions.
Have you picked a movie that like you really despise?
Having, yes. I think the way this works is that, I mean, we talked about maybe for the Christmas episode
right.
doing the Star Wars holiday special, which is really difficult to get through. It's really bad.
I didn't even know that existed.
And we thought it would be, and I mentioned this in the Discord, but we thought it'd be funny if Corey, who hasn't actually watched a Star Wars movie beginning to end, had only seen the Star Wars holiday special.
I have no idea what this movie is.
That would be kind of great though, because then when he's like, I don't like Star Wars, he'd be like, why? It's like, well, the holiday special is terrible.
You'd think based on the title, it's just like something they showed on TV, so it's only like 40 minutes long. It's an hour and 40 minutes long. And it's just real weird.
Is it like the original cast?
It's the original cast, seemingly dragged there against their will. The plot line is they're going to Kashyyyk, whatever, to meet up with Chewbacca's family.
Chewbacca is Santa.
No.
Damn.
To celebrate Life Day.
Yep.
And Chewbacca's family also speaks Wookiee and not Galactic Common.
Good.
So most of the characters are going, and that's like the whole. It's an hour and 40 minutes long.
Did they subtitle it?
Of course not.
Oh no!
No, so they'll go like, and Mark Hamill will be like, Chewbacca's dad says hi, and like that's
just he's the translator.
But yeah, like Mark Hamill's in it.
When was
Harrison Ford's a little bit in it. I think, but I don't know off the top of my head. I'm just based on the vibe. I would imagine probably between New Hope and Empire, based on the vibe. Maybe it comes out in like 1985. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll probably cut some of this out in case we end up doing it, just so we can talk about it and react then.
It sounds like a fantastic movie.
But yeah, it goes on so long. There's multiple segments that do not feature characters that are popular with fans.
Awesome.
B. Arthur from Golden Girls has a song.
Hell yeah.
There are
talking about bad movies. You're talking about the best movie ever.
Dead Poets Society.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
Was there anything else? Oh yeah, I mean, worth mentioning, Walt Whitman, mostly presumed to be a gay man, which is an important context for what we were talking about before, and I forgot to mention it then.
Oh, the one note I thought was fun was from The Cave when they were talking about the ghost stories, is OG Black Mirror episodes. So they were talking about putting the puzzle together and it was the killer's face in the window. It's like, oh, it's Black Mirror.
Anything else we want to say about Dead Poet Society? Besides, like, I understand a lot of the criticism, but it doesn't affect my enjoyment of the movie.
Sometimes you just got to go by what you feel. And
Yeah.
see.
The craft and the general and some of the sequences just worked on me. And whatever, I'm a sucker.
I love Robin Williams. That's what
Me
I.
too.
Suck the marrow, don't choke on the bone.
Yes, I like that line.
I like that a lot too.
Very nice.
Thanks for being on, guys.
Suck the marrow. Trash people.